Welcome back to another Bellows Blades video, and today we're going to be doing an update video on a knife that I picked up about 2 years ago now and has had a lot of time in my pocket. It has seen a lot of use, and so I have a better opinion of it and whether or not it would be recommended, and that is the Lightning Elite out the front. So this is about the most budget out the front you can pick up. When I bought this, it was about $30, $30 to $35. There is also the original Lightning, which I have not tried, but a lot of people swear by those as well. But today we want to just look at following up on this Lightning Elite. So my original video that I posted 2 years ago was kind of an unboxing initial impressions video. While I was messing around with the knife, initially I was very impressed with how well it seemed to be made and deploy and all that. Not a lot of blade play, whatever. And then as I was opening and closing it, it failed. And then it started just failing over and over again. And of course, I was disappointed about that. And so I did a follow-up video tearing it apart to see if I could troubleshoot it. Not to rehash all of those videos, you can look them up if you want to. But in essence, what happened is there are little stop pins within and out the front that stop the blade when it's fully extended and then stop it when it goes back in. And the stop pins have like a spring behind them that make them push out when the blade goes past. And what had happened is one of the springs was not properly seated in this knife from the factory. And so with the vibration of going in and out, it worked itself even more out of place to the where it stopped functioning. So I was able to push that spring back down in, properly seat it, and I have had thousands of deployments since then and no failures. Other than one time when I've had to tear this knife apart once to clean it. After using it for opening sandbags and all kinds of other stuff, I just had enough debris in there that it finally did gum up the works enough that it didn't deploy. So I tore it down, cleaned it, and that's the only time I've had it fail since then. So extremely reliable since fixing the problem. And so that's what I want to do. I want to give a more fair opinion. So those videos were initial impressions, my disappointment in having to mess with it, a brand new knife, and figure out what was wrong with it on my own, because the knife was so cheap that to mail it back at my expense was going to cost as much or more than the knife by the time I mailed it and got it back and did all that. So it just made sense to try and troubleshoot it myself, which I did. So that being said, since then, 100% reliable. And I gotta say, I really, really love this knife for a budget beater out the front. You can see it's got a lot of wear on it. You can see the paint wearing off from being in my pocket so much, and there's been a lot of hard use on it. Honestly, the wear's not that bad considering how much time this thing has spent in my pocket. You can see the wear around the pocket clip itself as well. And like I said, this thing has been torn apart and cleaned once, and that's been a while ago, so it's still pretty dirty. I will say that just fairly recently, I did notice that there's a little bit of like spring twang when retracting the blade, and you might be able to hear that on the video here in a minute. But honestly, that hasn't really bothered me. It feels solid when it deploys and retracts. It doesn't feel cheap. There's not a lot of blade play. The thing's been reliable. So up front, I just want to be clear before I start, nitpicking on the small things, that I do absolutely think this knife was worth $35. It was worth more than $35. It's a great beater knife, and this thing spoiled me on needing an out the front, because I never really, in theory, saw the usefulness of an out the front other than the cool factor. But having used this so much in day-to-day life, I can't really put into words and adequately describe. I mean, it's something you almost have to experience, but it sounds stupid because most knives are one-handed opening and closing, right? With a thumb stud or a flipper or whatever. They only take a second to deploy and take back. But there's something about being able to just do that is so much quicker, so much easier, and just feels faster. I don't know how else to put it other than it probably isn't all that much faster, but it feels faster. So when I need to use a knife, I pull it out, use it, put it back, and it just seems, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Like I said, I can't really put it into words until you've used one a lot and got used to using one, and then go back to using something that's not out the front. Then I guess maybe you would experience it for yourself. But this thing basically spoiled me on on other knives for EDC. I still do carry other knives, don't get me wrong. I don't exclusively carry out the fronts. But I will say that probably 80% of the time I'm carrying an out the front, just because it's what I prefer. There's basically one day a week, more or less, that I carry something other than an out the front. The rest of the week, I'm pretty much carrying an out the front. So anyway, that being said, all that to say that one of the things you may have noticed as I'm deploying this, if you look at my original videos, this was a drop point blade, right? And I am not a huge fan of drop point blades. I prefer a clip point. So you can see there what I did is I went ahead and converted that to a kind of an aggressive swept clip point. And I personally really prefer that profile. This thing has been, having that sharp point has just been way more useful to me than the drop point. I think it looks cooler, and overall, I just like it a lot better. So I wish they offered it with this. At least, I don't know. I haven't looked at them recently. When I bought it, they didn't offer a clip point. So I wish they offered it, but this was not hard to do, and that brings me to my first con. This steel is soft, okay? You are getting a budget Chinese knife, and so as a result, you're getting budget Chinese steel. The steel is soft. I'm talking probably 420 J2. Not 420 HC, but probably closer to 420 J2. At the very least, 440A. And I know there's a big difference between those two. I would say maybe it lands somewhere in the middle of those two, the 420 J2 and the 440A. But that's not to say it's not usable. If you're only going to be using this knife for opening packages and envelopes and things like that, mail, whatever, this would be perfectly suitable for that. Not a problem at all. Now, I've used it as a beater knife, so I can tell you it actually is even better. You know, you can use it for more than just that. This knife has been abused, and you can see I've not lost a lot of steel. Now, I do have to touch up this blade from time to time from little rolls or nicks or whatever that I get in the blade if I'm cutting anything that's too hard. If you use it very much, you're going to have to constantly be stropping it and kind of touching up the edge. That being said, this knife is in the state that I typically keep it in, which means I don't want to have to strop it every single time I use it. So I don't do that. But I will touch it up just to keep it right around shaving. Now, I know this thing will shave. I tested it on hair earlier. I'm not sure what it's going to do with paper because I don't know that it's that. Yeah, so you can see it kind of snags. It'll cut the paper, but it does, like right there, it tore a little bit. It does have some little tiny flat dull spots right here in the curve of the tip. But I mean, it'll cut paper, but it's not, you know, it's not impressively sharp. Now, that being said, you can get it impressively sharp. This thing will take a very polished edge, but it just isn't going to hold it very long. So it doesn't, to me, make a lot of sense to spend all that time getting it that sharp when it's going to almost instantly dull down to just a usable, workable edge. So that's kind of where I keep it. I just keep it at that usable edge, strop it once in a while to keep it at that point, and then if I hit anything that puts real big dings or nicks in the blade, then I, of course, have to actually touch it up on a stone. But overall, I mean, you can see there's wear on the knife. The paint hasn't really worn off much, which kind of surprises me that I haven't got a lot of wear on that. You know, just overall, it's been pretty good. Now, other thing I'll mention here, I don't know if you can tell or not, but there's a screw missing right here. So when I took this thing apart to troubleshoot it the first time and I put it all back together, it was not very long, probably less than a week later, that I noticed I was missing a screw. And so the vibration of deploying this thing over and over, I think just worked that out. So I took everything back out and put just a drop of Loctite on everything, and I've not had a problem since. So I would recommend doing that right off the bat, that you just put some Loctite on the screw so that you don't end up, you know, losing one. So when it comes down to it, I mentioned the biggest con is going to be the soft steel. That's by far the biggest con. I'd say the other thing is even smaller. It's aesthetics. This is not a pretty knife. Not really. It's just a square, cube, whatever you want to call it. But it's functional. I mean, it feels fine in the hand. It works good for a beater knife or a work knife. It's been solid, reliable. So really, other than it just doesn't look that pleasing to the eye, it's not it's not that attractive of a knife. But other than that, those are really kind of the two cons that I have for this. The pocket clip works just fine. Nothing great about it, but it's usable, it's serviceable. Like I said, the handle ergonomically isn't great, but it also doesn't create hot spots or anything. It's just kind of square, nothing fancy. The steel, mentioned that, it's soft. And the thing, because I think this is supposed to be aluminum, but I think it's supposed to be aluminum, but I think it might be some kind of an alloy. It's a little heavier than aluminum, which will bring me up to my last thing I want to point out. So I carried this knife for well over a year, probably a year and a half, satisfied with it, but kind of got annoyed with the soft steel. So I decided at this point, I had grown a preference for out the fronts for my everyday carry. And I didn't have any other really decent out the front other than a double-edged Microtech, which I did not want to use as an EDC. So I decided to spend a little more money and went out and bought myself this knife, the Kershaw Livewire. So this knife has now become my EDC. It's replaced the Lightning Elite in my pocket, you know, like I said, 6-7 days a week, or I guess 5 or 6 days a week. Usually 1 day a week, at least I carry something else. But this has been kind of my go-to. So this is the Magna Cut version, and this thing has been great as well. But that brings me to the one thing I was saying. This knife, at least in hand, feels significantly lighter than this knife. I've never weighed them, so that actually makes me go ahead and think, well, why not take the moment and do it? I just find out what the difference actually is. So you're looking at 4.23 ounces. And then 3.07. So yeah, I mean, that's a pretty significant difference. You know, it's over an ounce worth of difference there in the weight. You can definitely feel it in the hand, that the Livewire is lighter than the Lightning Elite. And you can see that the Lightning Elite, really, one is a little longer and thinner, the other is a little shorter, but also stockier. So they're about roughly the same size. This one, just the handle's a lot heavier than this one, which is true aluminum. So I do kind of wonder about this being aluminum or not. But all that being said, guys, I just want to follow it up. If you're looking to get into the world of out the fronts, I would absolutely recommend buying a Lightning Elite. You pick these things up for $30, $35, and I have gotten way more value out of this than that. I have beaten the heck out of this thing. It has been entirely reliable since I fixed the initial problem that I had. No issues whatsoever with it. And while I absolutely prefer this knife, there's no doubt about it, I would take this knife over this knife any day. You also have to look at it. This thing is about 6 times cheaper than this thing. So you can buy almost 6 of these for one of these. So, you know, if you don't have the budget or don't even want to spend the money on something a little higher end, I have no reservations about recommending the Lightning Elite. Just know that you may be unlucky like I did and find one that maybe something wasn't quite right from the factory. You might have to tear into it. Pretty simple mechanics in these knives, so you can probably troubleshoot and figure out what's going on, put it back together if that's the case, and then hopefully you'll have the same luck I've had where this thing has been just a tank, a workhorse, 100% reliable, no issues whatsoever with deploying, retracting, using this thing, and I've absolutely loved it. It has been replaced and retired at this point, but I got a good 1.5 years or more worth of use out of this, and it was worth every penny that I spent on it. So that's my follow-up, guys. After 1.5 years, 2 years, something like that in my pocket, I just wanted to make sure that I had my current opinion of this knife out there for anybody considering purchasing one. Feel free to look at my other videos. I still think there's useful information in there. But if you hear me pretty disappointed with the knife, just understand that was an initial reaction to having an issue with a new knife. Since then, absolutely satisfied with this knife. All right, guys, I've gone on long enough, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on another Bellows Blades review.